I'll start with Sarah Carpenter as the Executive Director of Vermont Housing Finance Agency. Sarah was appointed the Executive Director of VHFA in October of 1998. Before joining the agency, she was the Executive Director of Cathedral Square Corporation in Vermont, which is pretty well known, for 15 years. It's a nationally recognized leader in combining affordable housing and community services. Sarah serves on the boards of the National Council of State Housing Agencies, the Vermont Community Development Program, the Champlain Senior Center, and the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board. She previously served on a variety of other boards, including Fletcher Allen Healthcare, Vermont's academic healthcare system, the National Board of the American Association of Homes and Services for the Aging, AAHSA, Assurances Limited, a captive liability insurance company. Housing Vermont is a nonprofit statewide developer and a tax credit syndicator. The Community Development Advisory Board of the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston, the Advisory Board of the Federal Home Loan Bank of Boston, and a number of other charities. She probably doesn't sleep much.
No time, no free time.
Sarah is a cum laude graduate of the University of Vermont and holds a master's in public administration from Harvard University. Josh Hanford is our Deputy Commissioner of Vermont Department of Housing and Community Development. We see each other quite often at ACCD. Josh currently serves as a Deputy Commissioner for the Vermont Department of Housing and Community Development, overseeing the state housing and community development divisions. He's also served the last 11 years as Director of Vermont Community Development Program. During his tenure, he has managed the awarding of more than $140 million in HUD community development block grants and disaster recovery grants to hundreds of affordable housing and community development projects throughout Vermont. He's also worked as a project manager for several nonprofit organizations in Vermont and New Hampshire. He studied political science and geography at the University of New Hampshire, holds credentials in nonprofit and natural resources management. He lives in Randolph, Vermont with his wife and 2 children, and he enjoys fishing, skiing, and mountain biking. I can attest to the last 2. Alison Friedkin is the Director of Real Estate for Downstreet Housing and Community Development, previously Central Vermont Housing Land Trust, and has been with Downstreet since 2006. She holds a Bachelor of Science degree from UVM. As a Director of Real Estate Development, Alison develops real estate pipelines, secures funding for projects, and oversees their construction. She serves on the steering committee of the Vermont Affordable Housing Coalition and is an active member with the Vermont Business for Social Responsibility and Vermont Green Building Network. Alison has completed 2 certificate programs through Neighbor Networks America, Project Management and Organizational Management. Alison is deeply committed to developing sustainable, affordable housing in Vermont. She lives in Duxbury, enjoys biking, skiing, traveling, and cooking in her free time. Andrew Winter, whom I see several times a day on good days. Very active person, Alison's counterpart down here. Became the Executive Director of Twin Pines Housing in 2012. He has over 20 years of experience as a developer, funder, and investor in affordable housing projects. Prior to joining Twin Pines, he served as the Director of Real Estate for the Jamaica Plain Community Development Corporation, one of the leading community development corporations in the state of Massachusetts. He's managed development of various multifamily and supportive housing projects, and oversaw a portfolio of 450 residential units and 150,000 square feet of retail and commercial space. Prior to joining JPNDC, Andrew worked with MMA Financial, now Boston Financial. Lots of acronyms in this business. One of the leading syndicators of low-income housing tax credits in several positions. He also worked at Mass Housing as the first manager of the Massachusetts Affordable Housing Trust Fund, where he oversaw a $20 million a year subordinate loan program for the development and preservation of affordable housing. Prior to Mass Housing, Andrew worked for a nonprofit developer as Director of Project Management active in Massachusetts and Rhode Island. He is a former member and chair of the Hanover, New Hampshire Affordable Housing Commission, where he lives with his wife Rebecca and their 3 sons, as well as Board of Directors of the Southern Vermont Community Action. He currently serves on the board of the Vermont Directors for the Two Rivers Ottaquechee Commission. Andrew is a graduate of Bowdoin College and Northwestern University School of Law. So we are very pleased to have them here. Housing is a critical issue that we spend much of our time working on. combined with workforce education and transportation and communication, it is a way we think we can best preserve our communities and maintain the quality of life that is the reason that we've all either stayed here or came here in the first place. So they have a couple of them have some presentations that we have loaded. Mark's going to load them. And where shall we start? Perhaps Sarah came the farthest tonight. So. And when I made the calls to invite them, I said I think what we'd like to do is discuss the state of affairs. What are the challenges? What's working well? What isn't working well? What are the things that are good to avoid if you can, the pitfalls, and what kinds of assistance can you find? What kinds of partnerships can you make to say, okay, there are some buildings that are available. We want to put some housing there. It's a common theme throughout the state, and especially in our district.
Well, thank you for inviting me to join you. I don't know how many of you know Vermont Housing Finance Agency. We're a statewide organization. Many people know us for our home loans. We offer low-cost, low-fee loans to first-time home buyers and low and moderate home buyers. We deliver those products through local lenders, a number of whom are in this room, and we work through the marketplace to make sure that our homeowners get the best mortgage product available. I haven't prepared a lot on the home ownership programs, but certainly can answer questions on this. The few slides I have really are the result of another set of work that VHFA does, which is collect a lot of housing data around the state. We have in our bailiwick, we are the manager of the DORA, which is called the Director of Affordable Housing. So we have a website. You can find out where any affordable housing project is located in the state and its funding and how it breaks down. We also have a website called housingdata.org. And they actually have a little, I'll put them out later, it just shows you the website. That website you can go to and look by town, a huge amount of information, how many people live there, how many people are homeowners, how many people are renters, what's the average income of those people that live in town. There's a whole raft of housing data that's available to you both on the town level, the county level, and on the state level. The other program that we work a lot on, and I know people are interested, is our multifamily housing. We provide and administer federal and state housing tax credits. And that gets wonky quick, but it is, in fact, the largest source of funding for affordable rental housing. We receive those credits from the federal government. We allocate those to developers of housing like Andrew and Alison. They turn around and work with community partners. Again, a lot of the bank partners in this room buy the credits, and we can spend a little more time later on about how that works, but those credits provide equity, cash equity that we can put into the project and lower the cost of the housing to the end owner. Those programs come with a lot of strings and limitations, and to be honest, aren't all that flexible, but it is the driver of what we have been doing for affordable housing in the state. It is supplemented by a small, very modest state housing tax credit, and then our biggest source of gap funding, which I can speak to again a little bit later, are funds from the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board, which is a sister agency we work very closely with, and they get straight appropriations from the state of Vermont to provide the gap funding for housing. Again, both multifamily primarily, although they do some home ownership housing. Many of you have heard that Governor Scott has taken on affordable housing and is proposing a significant housing bond to really jumpstart production all through the state. We are hopeful the legislature, when they convene next week, will pass that along with the rest of the state budget. We've been assured that it's popular, and it is very popular. Representative Maslin helped us a lot, and so no matter what happens, we're still going on the assumption that that's going to go through, and it's going to be a much-needed resource. I think I mentioned earlier, one of the things that we at VHFA do is have a lot of data. So we actually did a housing study down here in 2013 around some of the needs for the East Central region. And so my slides really are just a few of the slides. We have a larger report. I've got only a couple of these, but again, you can get it online if you're more interested. It is 2013, but I don't think we feel like there's a lot of change. I think in some towns there's been changes, but in terms of the region and the sort of status of housing within this region. And these again are just snapshots to kind of give you a sense of what's going on in the region, and they're pretty self-explanatory. We use the town configuration. I think is it 40 towns or
40 between the two districts.
Yeah, to sort of get our data from. And as I mentioned, our housingdata.org, you can go down to town level. 37,000 people in this region. I don't know if this is matching with your data. Median income about 55,000. We found that 15% of the households are what we term as severely cost burdened. And that really means paying more than half of your income for rent. We know, in addition, there's a lot of people paying between 30 and 50% of their income for rent. 30% of your income for housing costs, and that's rent or mortgage, is kind of the benchmark when we talk about what's affordable. That's the term that we look at. Hopefully families not paying a lot more than 30% of their income for their housing costs. Certainly, difficulty is if you're paying more than 50% of your income for housing, you haven't got much left over for other goods and services, and that, of course, creates lots of instability. The population in the region has not grown a lot, and I'm sure that's, you've seen some of that, and I was interested, I know that some of your interest is how can you kickstart that a little bit. Unfortunately, in this same period of time, even though population hasn't grown, we have seen an increase in more people paying a lot of their income for housing. So it's sort of a sense that I don't know that people are coming and going, but there's some stagnation around income versus housing costs. And you have some drivers of housing costs in this region that makes the competition problematic for low and moderate income families. Part of the work we did on this survey was to do some surveys of employers, and we did find that most employers found housing to be an obstacle to further housing development or further economic development in the region. And we continue to hear that, and I'm sure that's why we're invited today, is how do we get our arms around that? There's this mismatch between wages, even competitive wages, and housing costs in Vermont. And this is the kind of group that's got to help us think it out. And I don't know that any one of us has a silver bullet for that, but it's certainly the dilemma we have. This part of the state has fewer year-round rental options than the rest of the state. Vermont actually has a very high homeownership rate, and that's a good thing. I will say we still, within the homeownership group, find many people cost burden, and we know that much of the stock may not be in great shape, but really where we have found a lack in this region and other parts of the rural state is rental options. We've got lots of towns that have no rental housing, and that means you're kind of stuck. You know, where are you going to go if you can't afford to buy or don't want to buy? And we certainly see homeowners, young people choosing by choice not to buy as early. Some reasons are they're not partnering up as soon as they used to. Many of them have student debt or other consumer debt that makes them ineligible for housing. So how do you, where do you go if you're not living with your parent, like my 25-year-old is, and you're not quite ready to buy? We also know that of the housing we have built in the state, more than half of it is targeted to people who are elderly or disabled. So we can have a little conversation around that. I often hear towns, let's have senior housing, senior rental housing, and I was saying to one of the guests here that we need to start thinking a little differently than that. I think what we need are more housing units accommodating to people who might be older, like my age, but not necessarily age segregated. And there's sort of, it's an interesting discussion to look at that. I was commenting to somebody, one of the newest projects we're funding is Bridge in Maine, just a block away here. In fact, we just closed on it, which was complex. It would be a great little project. That's a building that will, I think, be accommodating to older people, but it's not age restricted. So I expect to see a mix in that building, which is a good thing for a downtown like this, but you can be 25, 35, 55, 75 and live in that building, and it will have an elevator. All of the units will be universally designed and accommodating. So that I think will be a nice addition to your downtown. This is just this year's, and again, if you look on housingdata.org, you can see what we funded in the past. We've just allocated funding for the Wilson Block in Springfield. That will be a targeted special purpose project intended to serve homeless youth, and we know that's been a problem in downtown Springfield. And we also know the Wilson Block itself is pretty much of a white elephant of a building and has been problematic to the complexion of the downtown. So I think we're very excited because it's kind of a twofer. It'll clean up that downtown block and serve a very targeted, supported, and I think this is really important to understand, it'll be staffed with folks who can work with the youth and hopefully send them in the right direction. The other building we more recently did in this region was Stafford Commons in Woodstock that Andrew was involved in, and that's a case study unto itself of how long it takes to develop and do a building, and something I hope this group, and I know many in this room have already been critically involved in, how do we get communities to be accepting of when we call something affordable, welcoming it into their community. As I mentioned, one of the competitions in this region is vacation homes, and this is not just this region, but it's in a number of parts of the state. So you sort of create a competition raising the bar of home prices for people who might buy them for second homes, and that can create an imbalance with your year-round homes. 37% of Windsor County's home sales were vacation homes, compared to 22% statewide. And so it's not just sort of ski area homes. You sort of think of, condominiums in ski areas, or, Queechee or something like that. We've seen a phenomena of regular houses, for lack of a better way to say it, being purchased as second homes, because if you're coming from New York City or Boston, they are very affordable. If you can buy one, what is it, $250,000, that's way cheap by city standards. So that's just a unique pressure that you've got in this area, and it drives up home prices. You also have some of that same pressure with rental units, where seasonal workers or second home people are looking for rental units. And it pushes out of reach the homes for the sort of full-time people who may be at a lower wage. So, like I said, no silver bullets here. I think it's got to be an ongoing discussion. I've talked with folks about identifying a bunch of homes or pieces of real estate in this region that really need to be better used. So how do we use those pieces of real estate and accommodate them, and at the same time really perk up the look of the town? And these are not easy buildings to do. They're expensive to do, and so there's a huge tension around the need to fix up sort of our existing stock and the cost of doing it. Located within those cost drivers are things like needing water and sewer, having parking available. How do you accommodate that? And in Vermont, we want to be all things to all people, and we do a fairly good job at it. But again, it's a tension in the housing industry, wanting our housing to have the highest energy codes. That's the right thing to do, but it can, drive cost. We find sometimes when towns identify a rundown building that they would love to have sold, and they'd love to sell it to Andrew or Alison, but the existing owner wants a price that doesn't quite work economically. So while this is a sidebar, looking at housing town rental codes and enforcing them so that you encourage the owner to perhaps sell at a lower price when we're looking at it. There's a lot of strategies out there, and I hope that's with your group, and we can talk about a little bit later. One of the other things I'm just going to also mention, in the tensions we've got out there, is the need to produce new units, but finding that some of the stuff that we developed, 20 plus 25 years ago is in need of recapitalization. And so with a fixed pot of money like housing credits and VHCB needing to go back, and it's not having anything to do with the operations, it's simply housing kind of wears out, and the way we fund it, we really sometimes need to put new resources in, because we'd certainly be taking a step backwards if we let our current affordable stock deteriorate at the same time we want to build new stuff. And the last slide is just some of the resources we've got available to you. As I said, they're on our website. I'll leave a little card with our contact information, and feel free to call me, or don't even call me. You can call Leslie in my office, and she'd be happy to walk you through some of the web resources and the data resources that we've got. And certainly call if you want to know more about any of the funding programs or anything like that. Well, thank you.
I don't have a PowerPoint, so I'm thinking that they're kind of setting the stage, and then I can jump into other
Support some of
topics
those
and
things, sure.
get some questions going. We all work together too.
Yeah, yes.
I'm on her board, she's on my board,
Yeah.
they're both seek funding from.
Yeah.
I know, I appreciate that plug for preservation projects.
Yes.
Thank you, Sarah. Josh.
Yeah.
So again, my name is Alison Friedkin, and I'm with Downstreet Housing and Community Development, formerly Central Vermont Community Land Trust. And our service area is Central Vermont, the only community in your 40-town area that we are currently working in is Bradford. So kind of a little bit not as,
Don't you have something in Corinth too?
no,
No?
not that I'm aware of. No. Is that a trick question? Um,
It used to be somewhere else and it moved.
Oh, okay.
There you go.
Must be one of the mobile homes there.
We were founded in 1987, celebrating our 30th year this year. Let's see. Again, I mentioned our service area, so just more specifically, so Washington County, so that's the Mad River Valley, that's Montpelier and Barry, and then Bradford. That's, I think I've hit on the big ones. So a little bit about why we do what we do. So obviously there's the need for housing in our community, but again, also being a community development organization, we also try and meet the needs of the community in other ways. So we work with a whole bunch of strategic partners. That can be all the funders, that can be social service agencies. And basically, we try to help people not just have stable housing, but have that stable housing then lead to a more stable life. So that can be, you know, their work, their medical, their financial. Let's see. So our lines of business, we have 4 primary lines of business. We have our property and asset management department. We have our home ownership center, real estate development, SASH, which is not just our program, but that's a statewide program, support and services at home, whereby we provide support and services to seniors in our properties. And this isn't exactly a line of business, but it's something that is a common thread throughout our whole organization, and that is our commitment to green. Let's see, in what year? In 2015, we were designated a NeighborWorks Green organization. NeighborWorks is a national housing organization for which we are a charter member. And they initiated a program, their green organization, and we got that certification, like I said, in 2015. And basically what that is looking at our whole organization, our lines of business, and also our operation with a sustainability lens on it. So a couple of the examples of some of the things on the side there that we've done, but it's an ongoing program. It's we have a group of employees that meet every other month and are constantly asking that question, you know, what are we doing? Are all of our practices leading towards a more sustainable planet? Let's see what else. Oh, that might be the last one. The next one. Our contact information, again, we're based in Barrie, but we do have properties in Bradford, so we have a property manager and maintenance staff who are regularly in the Bradford area, and other than that, we're out in the field or in Barrie. That's just a little bit about who we are, and then I just wanted to mention too, when we get into a little more of a conversation, we did a housing needs assessment in 2016. And while again I was looking at the majority of our service area, we did ask the folks who did the report to dive deeper and do greater detail on Bradford. So I do have some information that, when we get into a little bit more of a conversation, that I'd be happy to share. Basically, summarizing the community needs in Bradford, where if there are dollars to be invested there, they'd be most wisely invested. Because we find that that's one of the biggest hurdles we have with communities, is that what they perceive as the need versus what the data says. So we can talk about that a little bit when we get into it. So that's it, short and sweet.
Great, thank you. Again, my name is Andrew Winter, and I'm Executive Director at, Twin Pines Housing Trust. And here we are. My apologies to Sally, who had the pleasure of seeing this presentation last week. And we had a great housing conference here, a preservation conference here in White River. And so I'm not sure anybody else caught that, but we're going through the same thing. If I can go back one slide. We talked a little bit about Safford Commons. Sarah made mention to it. This is a project that Sally knows well. This was the subject of 7 years of litigation to kind of get 28 units of affordable housing built. I'm sure there's a lesson to be learned here, and we can talk a little bit about the lessons here, but it's a wonderful project, and a lot of efforts were made to design a project that would win acceptance, but sometimes getting all the neighbors on board for a new project and the change that it represents is difficult. But we think it's a real asset to the Woodstock community today. So thanks to the folks at VCDP and Vermont Housing Finance for sticking with us to make this project a reality, because it really does take that kind of long-term to do a project like this. Thank you, Mark. So Twin Pines, we are an affordable housing developer, owner, manager here in the Upper Valley. We have properties on both sides of the river, 60% in New Hampshire, 40% here in Vermont. Just under 400 units at this point. We'll talk about a few projects we're working on and give you kind of an idea of what is in store. We do property management for about 2/3 of the units. We have third-party property managers for the balance, and we also include resident support services. Alison made reference to the SASH program. We run the SASH program here in Hartford and Norwich, which provides support services for seniors. And we also work in partnership with WISE, Listen, and Upper Valley Haven to provide financial counseling services through a shared position. So that's an important part of what we do, and frankly, kind of a differentiating factor from a lot of other landlords and what they're doing in terms of supporting their residents. Thanks. Why does affordable housing matter? So, one of the challenges that we have here in the Upper Valley is a really low vacancy rate. We're looking at a market rate around 1%. For affordable, we turn them over, we fill them, and very, very quickly. And who needs that housing? It's often, we talk a little bit about it, single-parent households, early career professionals, disabled, seniors with inadequate savings. We're trying to solve their housing problems and through projects like Gaia Hill in Hanover, which you see in the upper right corner there, and Safford Commons. So when we talk about affordable housing, we'll be talking about, we've been using a bunch of different terms just to define it. Most of the programs that are available that we utilize to develop new housing are focused on something called area median income, and we'll use that term a little bit more as we kind of go through things. Most of the programs are focused on people sort of at 50, 60% of the area median. There's some programs that serve people at higher income, some that are restricted to lower, but that's a term we'll use. We talk about subsidized housing. Twin Pines has a portfolio that includes a number of subsidized units. And so if the world of affordable housing is this, the universe that is subsidized is this. It's a smaller subset of projects where there are, Section 8 or other rentals assistance is provided to the residents who live there. But the vast majority of affordable housing is income restricted, rent restricted, and folks have to have income to be able to afford it. So we'll talk about some of those terms as we go through, but this will give us all a common lexicon as we talk through it. Here's the income required for affordable housing. This is data for Windsor County, looking at household size across the top, the columns across the top. The rows across the bottom represent the 50, 60, and 80% rents. So if you have a project that is developed with tax credits and you've got a two-person household, you are looking at potentially families making up to $34,000. They have to have sufficient income to be able to afford it, but we're going to cap the income of eligible households at that 60% rent. And sometimes there are some units that might be at 50%. Some projects may have units that are higher income, but most of the affordable housing that's being created at this point is sort of focused on that 50 and 60%, those 50 and 60% bands. One of the things that this is looking at. Sorry, Sarah, this is from New Hampshire housing, but this is looking at data from the Lebanon micropolitan area that we're in. And you can see, looking at sort of 17 years of data, just how dramatically housing prices have risen during that time. And there are, folks who are paying $1,700 and as much as $2,400 in our region for a two-bedroom unit. And what is driving that is, if we go to the next slide, is rental housing vacancy rates that are incredibly low. You'll see that we're below 2%. And one of the sort of the most fascinating things for me to kind of look at this data was to appreciate the fact that we have new projects coming online in our region. 252 units up by the hospital at Dartmouth Hitchcock Medical Center. Boom, gone, off the market. Fully absorbed within a year, and that's pretty amazing to kind of look at this data and realize you're putting more units into the marketplace, but they are being so quickly absorbed. Okay. A picture, they say, is worth 1,000 words, and this is a little bit of a shot of a project that we've been working on here in Hartford. Sometimes it's new construction. The two buildings on the left, 459 and 388 South Main Street, those are new construction right down the street. We took a couple of older properties that were not in particularly good shape, demolished them. Thank you, Rich. And the Hartford Planning Board for giving us approval on that, but we were able to put in new units that are on town water, on town sewer, in the village center, on advanced transit. So excellent access to services in town. And then we've been rehabbing a couple of other properties. Queechy Pines, which was Bob Haynes' property, once upon a time.
For a day.
was built in, what, the 70s?
1978, I think.
78. Sort of a ski chalet type or ski house type concept, and we were able to renovate that so that it's ready to go for the next 20 plus years. And then one of my favorites, and people say it is the prettiest affordable housing unit in the state. Sorry, Alison. The second floor unit at Hillcrest Manor. This is a great home on VA Cutoff, where VA Cutoff passes just under Route 4 here in Hartford. And it really came out well. We're looking forward to showing that off sometime this summer when we have an open house for the completed project. Yes, we'll get everybody there. Examples of the kind of work that we can do, there are challenges with these types of projects. There are no elevators, no access in these. So we'll talk about some of the efforts that we're doing elsewhere to try to address access. I'd like to talk about Gaia Hill. This is our largest development project. We partnered with the Heartland Group. Moreau Weinberger, who's the mayor of Burlington, was our one of our development partners on this project. This is an example of the impact that a community can have in helping to foster the creation of housing. The town of Hanover donated with a deed 21 acres of land to Twin Pines to allow us. They stipulated what they wanted in terms of affordability, that at least 50% of the units be affordable. But we have a community of 120 units, 57% of which are affordable, a mixture of rental and ownership, and 43% are market, again, a mixture of ownership and rental. And so we just finished the last 15 units up there. It's right on the access road by the hospital, so if you're ever up there, I invite you to take a drive through and take a look at it. We're very proud of this project. Long time, complicated project as well. It's not just about building new, as I said earlier. This is something we're working on right now. And it is important to kind of figure out ways to rehab buildings. This is something that we're going to be purchasing next month. We're working with the city of Lebanon, which has been focused on trying to figure out solutions for camping, overnight camping, the homeless population in town. And this is our effort to try to do it. We're going to be doing 18 units that will serve the chronically homeless, spending probably about just under $1 million to renovate this property. And again, central location on public transportation. Again, it's about partnerships. We're partnering with the Upper Valley Haven, which will provide enhanced case management services to help serve the folks who are going to live there. Okay. This is since we're here in the village of White River Junction. Love to talk about what we're working on in terms of new projects. This is Sykes Mountain Avenue, and I'll put a plug in for it now, Josh. We've gotten some of our funding from the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board. We're up in front of Josh's organization next week. We received our last permit on Monday night, last permit approval from the planning board here in Hartford. 6.5 acres parcel, and if we go to the next, this site is right as you go up Sykes Mountain Avenue. It's on town water, it's on town sewer, it's in the designated growth area, and it's on advanced transit and where we want to be building housing. And one of the things that we really like about building a project like this is it is a mixture of 14 one-bedrooms, 16 two-bedrooms in essentially what we'll read as a 4-story building, 3-story building, 3 floors of apartments and parking underneath. But it is accessible, and that's a challenge. One of my saddest moments at Safford Commons was I had somebody show up, and because of demands, this gentleman was stuck with a 2nd floor unit. He's 92 years old. I don't want to be putting, I personally, would love to have him in a truly 1st floor accessible unit. And the next thing with a project like this, we've got elevator, we've got universal design. It will be accessible and visitable. All the units will be visitable to anyone, and allowing people to age safely in place. So that's something that's important. So if you go to the next slide, to just kind of get a nice view of that, what we were able to do with this particular project is sort of build it into the hillside. So you've got a 3 stories community room on the front of the building, and 3 stories of housing. You'll see down at the 1st level an entrance into covered parking underneath. And again, part of the goal is to try to minimize the impact, in terms on the environment, in terms of impervious surface. So we're very excited about this. Kind of an example, if you will, of some of the exciting options when building new. So that's a quick overview on what we're working on.
Well, I don't have any pictures, so in their town plans and in their bylaws and zoning. They don't restrict multifamily housing or certain types of housing based on any of the things race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, income, receipt of public assistance. And you have to be careful about those things and really be taking a positive view on welcoming all people that need housing to your community. Having the $1 million house and the mobile home is a healthy community. All in between, and you have to be willing to accept and offer all those types of housing in your community, in the department's view. And a lot of that, comes from municipal leadership. Having folks that are taking this issue to heart, and it's different. The needs in Bradford or Norwich or Bradford, Norwich, or White Junction are all different. In some communities, there is some housing stock that already exists that is tired and underutilized and vacant in some traditional neighborhoods, that it's really a strategy about reinvesting in those smaller properties to bring them back online, make sure they're in good condition, something that the community is proud of, that other people in the neighborhood will rally around, and also fix up their properties and be proud of their community. And that maybe is a different strategy than needing 250 new units near Dartmouth. You have to look at this information and understand what each community needs. Infrastructure. The places that already have adequate water, sewer, and streets, you already have some of your costs dealt with. It's expensive to bring those services out to areas to build new housing. And that's a place that the municipality can help, bonding or other tools to say, hey, we want to welcome housing. We're going to do our part and try to seek other grants and low-interest loans to help with the development of this housing. Because if the municipality isn't doing it, those costs are all they have to be paid for by the housing developers, and they have to bake those into their budgets. And anything you can do to help reduce those costs is something the community should be looking at. We've seen some examples of larger multifamily properties which serve a need. Often a good use of that old school building or whatever it is that you say, hey, we have this housing shortage, why can't we turn that into affordable housing? And that's true, and those projects, they take a lot of partners, and you've got a couple in the room here. But I think, I work for the governor, and one of the charges, we literally just had a meeting this morning about workforce housing goals. Now, workforce housing is a term that people in this industry really don't like to use because people in affordable housing work. But what it's really meant to get at is this middle income housing, the 80% to 120% of area median income. There was a housing study done statewide a couple years ago that really spoke to the needs in Vermont and by county, and it's available on our website. Which actually shows a good thing, that we've done a better job at meeting the needs of people in that exact 50 to 60% range in building housing. But below 30%, the very low income folks, obviously there isn't a place for lots of places for them to call home at what they can afford to pay. And the 80 to 120, there really isn't a lot of programs that subsidize building those units or rents or construction. And then above 120, you start to get to markets that people are able to take out a mortgage and buy a home. You're at those income levels, and it's this 80 to 120% that the smaller scale developments. When we had the conference here last week, the downtown conference, there was a private developer there, and he talked about 3 or 4 units in the top of this building, 3 or 4 units in the top of this building, and the scale to do projects like that, and someone taking the risk and doing that on their own has to be part of the housing solution in Vermont, in my opinion. The resources that we have to support the awesome work that these groups do, they're not enough. And we're not increasing those vacancy rates with just these tools. There has to be folks out there that are willing to try little small-scale developments, housing on their own. There are low-interest loans to be had for those type of developers. I can point folks into some resources for that. So I want to leave that on the table too. That there's a place for all housing for all and all types of developers with Vermont severe housing needs. There's also a wage issue. We can build all the housing, we can try to raise the funds to build, but the fact is people need good wages to be able to afford the rents to pay for the development of the housing. If you're not getting it all as grants to build the housing, you've got debt service. You need to charge, a rent to pay that back. And we need to work on the wage side as well. And that's why, housing and the economy and bringing businesses in, it's circular, right? I mean, they are afraid that they're not going to find the workforce, and the people that they bring in aren't going to find the housing that they need. And the wages need to be high enough for people to afford the housing that's available. So it's a tough issue all around. And as Sarah said, there's no silver bullets. There's no one strategy that's going to fix all this. But it's a commitment to doing it. It's a commitment, I think, at the local municipal level to saying, we think this is a need, and we're going to, have a discussion with our community and say, we need more housing. It's okay to grow and to bring, new families in, to bring seniors in. Because right now, if you look at your community, look at the rents in the paper, look what's available. If you're not seeing something that you or your kids or a family friend can afford or would be willing to live in, well, then there's a problem. And it really does need to start grassroots, and because the funding and the resources are very competitive to pull off these deals, and communities need to be ready and willing to have that discussion at the local level.
I had one to start, which is, a term you hear often is a public-private partnership.
Mm-hmm.
Companies working to develop training curricula, or companies working with municipalities to do utility extensions or things like that. Have any of you worked on projects where a municipality might partner with a housing developer, to help with the bond, the credit worthiness, the bonding, or the equity in the first place? If a town has a school or a firehouse or something they're not using, that's something that that you see. But do you have any examples where towns are actually participating with capital?
Not enough, no. We hear this conversation, we need housing, but then, when the rubber hits the road, is the town willing to provide the resource? And to be blunt, no, we don't see much of that. Some towns are more supportive than others in helping you get something done, like a sewer extension. So I think we've done a couple towns. A couple of the sewer extensions also got a lot of money from the CD program, so they were in support of and applied for a grant. Maybe they took on some debt because the sewer was, for the whole town. I'm struggling a little bit. We've had a few instances with donated buildings, but be careful what you wish for, because those are often not easy buildings. They tend to be expensive. And so it's this big tension around the resource and the equity needed to get the project built, and what especially small rural towns feel they can get.
I mean, I guess I would say the TIF district,
Yes,
tax
yes.
financing. Those communities that have applied, received, and a plan for a TIF, they're getting themselves ready. They're providing a resource to allow for that development to happen. and many of those TIF communities that have TIF districts, they've seen more housing built in that district. Right, I mean, it works.
What's happening here?
So that's one example. The other designations, communities that have sought these designations to say, hey, look, we want to, have more density in our downtown, and we've done the planning, and we want some permit relief because we've planned to death, and we know exactly where our development should be, and we've seen those communities get more housing. They've been able to reduce some of the cost and have that discussion in a very organized way. There's some communities that have done sewer upgrades or expansions that then now a new development that comes online can hook up and nothing new needs to be built. And they've done that for a variety of reasons, and they've gone to USG Rural Development or VITA or whatever to borrow money to do that. But it's not nearly enough from what we see.
Yeah, we're all chasing the same dollars.
Yeah.
But John, I think you've forgotten one, which is your local revolving loan fund
Yep.
from previous CD grants.
Yes.
Yep.
Both the towns of Springfield and Windsor have used revolving loan funds to support efforts.
Yep, that's true. Yep.
And the project that we showed here, the Hartford scattered sites project, also benefited from revolving loan funds from the town. One other example I'll throw out there, the project I showed you in Hanover, Gaia Hill, the town decided that part of their contribution to getting that project completed was, we had made a commitment to install a sidewalk along Route 120 to allow people to get from the hospital through the project and down into the town center. The town, we agreed to provide the dollars to pay for materials, and the town is doing the labor on the installation of the sidewalk. So again, it's just a small example, but sometimes little things like that can make a big difference in getting a project over the finish line.
That's true. I've seen some sidewalks, and hey, if you're going to do this, yes, we'll add this element, because we know it's going to be beneficial to the town.
I mentioned the housing bond that Governor Scott has been promoting and we're all waiting for, and there is going to be targeting to try to work for moderate income housing. And I think one of the ways of targeting some of that money may not be to the housing unit itself, but to infrastructure that a town might need to build the housing. So, I encourage all of you to kind of think broadly, because there may be some roles that dollar could provide, and actually provide a grant to the municipality, not necessarily to the owner of the housing, but to the municipality to get that next piece that you need.
Mel, you had a question there?
Yeah, mine comes right on the tail of your question or comment. In defense of municipalities, and I shouldn't be doing that, but in defense of we have a lot of infrastructure challenges, and to say that we ought to be contributing to affordable housing means that we have to do that in lieu of funding something else that's already been built and is now broken, primarily underground infrastructure or highways. So the challenges are significant, and that means that we try to use the grant mechanism that primarily ends up being federal funding in some way or another passing through. But when we try to talk for public-private partnerships or get private developers to build, they talk to us for half an hour and leave the room. Because at today's pricing, real estate and construction, there's not a developer out there who can build a parcel, who can sell it affordably and get a return on investment. So they won't take the projects. We have them in Randolph where the development corporation or the town owns land that's been set aside for that purpose. We either have to have a grant to build it, and you all know how difficult, you just described that they're difficult to get, and maybe more difficult given the current constraints. But what can we do to encourage this public-private public-private collaboration. And TIF is fine if your retail area and your community size can make it work, but it's not, if that's our only answer, and if revolving loans left over from previous federal funding are the only answer, they don't hold out, they don't give us much hope. I'm just discouraged because we've, for years, built our public housing, bad term, affordable housing, with somebody else's money, and because that's, in Vermont, that's really all we've been able to afford. And if that's where we are, how do we get out of that?
I don't have an easy answer. I do think looking at ways to combine housing with other, I'm just going to use the word anchor tenant, you know, somebody that can help you with the overhead, and are easier, not that easy to find either, but sort of those combined uses, and sometimes they're community uses. They're not really private entrepreneur, you know.
Maybe community college or
Yes, I mean
a hospital.
Brattleboro project, the Brooks House, which is a private developer who has, CCV is a major acre tenant. That makes it work. There are some programs that are in about 12 communities called New Markets Tax Credits. That actually works in that community. Unfortunately, it doesn't work in a lot of other communities. So it really is, you know, putting your thinking cap on. You know, we used to get a little uptake from post offices, but they're sort of going away. So thinking about, is there anything else in your town that could be like an anchor tenant upon which housing could go on top of or beside?
We have somebody that wants to be a real big anchor up in our neighborhood. He's called David Hall. And he wants to put 20,000 people in 4 little towns corner. Now, I want you to know he is about as popular as the Black Plague.
I hear that.
So this is absolutely what you're saying you want, but nobody wants it.
Well, I wasn't thinking that big.
He's not particularly affordable housing.
Well, you know he is. He's going to be affordable housing. Nobody's going to have any money. They're going to all live in 200 square feet and everything else.
Well, I mean, you know, it's not consistent with the town master plans.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, part of what, you know, when we look at a project like 6 Mile Avenue, we're looking at we look at the town master plan and say, where does the community want the housing? And does that make, you know, and you know, try to build it there. What David Hall's talking about is totally contrary to that approach.
Well, we're quite aware of that.
Yeah, I mean, you know, but again, you know, I think here, it's trying to figure out what the local community is looking for and putting it where they're talking about putting it.
And one other quick question is that just in this morning's radio, the retail industry is talking about a 20% contraction in number of jobs and space used and so forth. And what is retail? Everything you want downtown. But if we don't have any retail anymore in serious quantities, what are you going to fill a space with?
Food and drink, services. No, I mean,
Housing.
Mel's bringing up a real issue about the cost difference between what it costs to build something and what it appraises afterwards, and whether it's commercial or housing. Everyone kind of that's playing in this world knows that this is going on. You know, you're only going to be able to borrow 80, maybe 90%. You know, you're not going to construct it for, the day you construct it, it's going to be worth less than what you borrowed it for by 20, 30, maybe 40%. I mean, that's what's going on and why it's hard. We have all these market stimulus, you know, new market tax credits, long housing tax credits, historic tax credits, village, and we have all these things to try to help with that, try to bring a market to what we want to build that isn't there naturally. And that is a little bit scary. And you know, you talk about the downtowns, but I think that what David Hall, what you're talking about, Bushrod, with bringing tons of, we're talking about serving the people that are already here. I mean, you know, all that's statistics Sarah showed, we're not growing in population in this region, but yet we have a housing shortage, and it's because smaller household size. You know, people are, you know, there's more single head of household families. There's more people that need housing, you know, and the solutions to that, maybe there's some smaller, more cost-effective housing that needs to be built. It doesn't need to be as many square feet as what we're used to. You know, I don't think any of us have the answer, but it's not, you have to keep trying something new. And if someone can find a way to bring online housing at a lower cost, I think everyone would be willing to look at it. You know, one of the recents is right here, the Vermont, you know, Wilder, the plant that's, you know, building these energy efficient, zero, you know, passive homes, you know, but they're still $150,000, and it's not quite as affordable as I think many people would like, but it's a new alternative that's, you know, coming on the market. So
one thing that hasn't gotten much uptake in Vermont and is a few years ago, the state passed enabling legislation that encourages towns to encourage homeowners to do accessory apartments, i.e. take home and divide it up. And I just toss that out because it's something I think might work better if you could get more communities organized to do it. And you think of an older homeowner, they're sitting in too big a house, but they're daunted by the thought of going to the planning commission, getting you know, a zoning permit, finding a contractor, putting in an extra bathroom, all this stuff. And I'd love to see more activity in encouraging existing homeowners. Actually, New Hampshire Housing did a great study, and I'm sure it really would apply to the same region around how many overhoused people there are. I mean, we're an aging demographic. People are just sitting in homes too big. And we haven't cracked that nut yet in any meaningful way.
Well, we have a big challenge, and I'll speak to my town specifically, the old Victorian homes, the classic, gorgeous 19th century home that now is woefully in need of maintenance and paint. It's lead painted. The people who own it can't afford to insulate it properly. It may be rented, poorly divided into some kind of less than affordable housing, but they can't afford to do the things that are necessary to turn it into a real 2 or 3 family home. And we don't have any funding mechanisms in our programs to support those.
Well, there's some, that's one of the things that we're working on with CDBG. We have home ownership centers, you know, Alison is in one of them, that, and there's five that cover the whole state. Those home ownership centers receive funding from us and others to do low interest, sometimes deferred loans, sometimes small grant portions to lower income homeowners, but they can also do small apartments, 4 units and under. And you can help those small apartment owners rehab and reinvest in those properties, bring weatherization in and life safety upgrades, and there's money available for that. It needs to be scaled up, it needs to be more broadly available, but I think that is a tool that with limited funding, you know, $15,000 per unit, you give someone a $5,000 grant, loan them another $15,000, they'll do it. They'll fix up those units, they'll make them available, and there's a pilot project right now going on in Bennington. That just this very concept, the town came, they defined a neighborhood that said, look, we have all these beautiful homes that are just falling into disrepair. They're all carved up into 2, 3 units. The neighborhood's falling apart. What can we do? And they proposed a pilot, and you know, we'll see, you know, if it works, because I've heard a lot of folks say, it doesn't really work. There's challenges there, and I think there's not more opportunity than I think there's more opportunity there that we should focus on.
And I think we need to capture that circumstance when you have a homeowner involved, as opposed to something that's already been carved up and maybe a disengaged landlord who's really not ready. So I don't know how you get to that point where you get somebody before it gets beyond just being carved up and maybe a disengaged landlord.
In
But the
that
place-
case, almost makes it too late.
You said public-private partnerships. One of the things we're seeing, I don't know if you can call it private hospitals, they're releasing their patients, and they know the home they're going back to is unhealthy, and they're going to be back in the hospital. We've seen hospitals giving grants to housing organizations to go and follow that patient and fix up their apartment so that they're healthier. They know it's going to cost them less to invest $5,000 into that apartment, make it healthier, rather than the $5,000 that it's going to cost for them to be there for 2 more days. So hospitals are doing that. We're seeing it in Rutland, we're seeing it in Bennington. I think there's some examples up in Chittenden County. The healthcare is a huge part of our economy, and if there's any way to save costs to deal with housing, because housing is part of healthcare, I think there's untapped resources there in any community that has a hospital. And it's a different approach, but we're seeing it happen.
The biggest problem I've got in my town is we have 0 vacancy rate. And there isn't even enough frictional vacancy to allow the market to rationalize. I've got people who are able to afford far more housing than they're living in right now because they can't find it. We've got people who are doubling and tripling up in housing they can't afford. In fact, our numbers on what's referred to as non-family households between $50,000 and $75,000 a year is ridiculous. We got 3 guys who make 22 grand a piece living in a 3-bedroom, 1-bath ranch somewhere because they can't afford individual housing. We need enough slack so that people who can afford more housing than they're living in now can find it, but yet at the same time the market settles down enough. I've got 4 units coming online for July 1. He's had that building rented since April 1st. So we actually have people who are waiting for units to come available. Where they're living now, I have no idea. Of course, we've got people sitting on property who seem to think that if they're the first one who sells, they're going to get screwed, and the last one who sells is going to make $1 million on their worthless piece of property. What do we do about that?
What community are you in?
Pardon me? Fairly. And we often get talked to by housing people like we're some sort of resort community. And we do have a lot of seasonals around that lake, but we also have a large employer that employs housekeeping staff, groundskeepers on a golf course. We have relatively modest income people who are driving an hour and a half to go to work because there is no housing in close.
And I think the first thing, Chris, that we talked about with officials there is getting a housing needs study and getting the dollars. And BCDP, Josh and his folks can help with that so that we can really begin to understand what's going on in the marketplace. Because then it becomes easier for us to make a case to Sarah and Josh and the folks at VHCB that this is a priority.
I've just written a grant to try to get, those, like the non-family household issue teased out. Nobody wants to take that contract. I have the money sitting there ready to go, but nobody wants to.
You mean a vendor to do this?
Exactly.
Even they're all booked.
Well, I certainly can talk to my office and see who they know. It's a tough, it's hard to drill down in the market in a small community because there's still, this sort of disconnect. If you need more stock, which it sounds like you do, but we can't, one of our dilemmas of the day is we can't build it. We're all going to shutter, but these 2 last projects are $300,000 a unit. That's what we're talking about. And those are small units. And so it's this mismatch of...
Well, I often wonder, is there an issue? We have great soils. It's 100 feet of sand down to the bedrock. But we don't have a central sewer system. We do have a village water system. We do have zoning in place to encourage multifamily housing, to encourage second-floor occupancy for commercial buildings. But my occupancy rate for commercial buildings is 100%. I have one gas station building that's vacant, and we really look at it more as a vacant lot than, as we suspect highly, we have a brownfield issue under it. So we're full. There's lots of opportunity for infill development. But,
Market City.
you know,
And then, but and I
And then
will
we
say-
get Downstreet.
the hooks are baited, we just don't get in a bite.
But it's easier, you know, one of the challenges, as you know, as, you know, at the end of the day, with a finite amount of resources, we get these low-income housing tax credits from the feds, they come to the state, Sarah's got to allocate them. You do, what, 5 projects a year?
About all we have.
Yeah. 2 of them are going to go to Chittenden County, maybe 3.
Not always, but.
Not always, but the point is, it's a finite resource, and we're trying to make sure that we, you know, we address units that are in, you know, falling apart and keep them in the stock, and it's about trying to address, you know, higher growth areas, and so we've got to make sure that we've got the best data we can to accurately portray the issue and figure out creative solutions to try to, you know, make things happen.
And if you talk to some of the folks in this town that have done these creative apartments, you know, Tom Busey, I'm getting the names wrong, but
Matt Busey.
and, you know, they ignored all that stuff. They just said, hey, this is a funky building, I think there's a demand here, I'm gonna build some units. Sure enough, they filled up. They didn't follow any of those models. And that's what I'm saying, if someone thinks they could build 2 or 3, go pencil it out and see if you can do it. Because, you know, there's one economist in our office that says, oh, you housing guys are crazy. It's a supply and demand thing. You know, if there is that much demand and they fill up, then people just aren't, there's not enough people building it. And there's money to be made, someone will find a way to make it. And if there's some people out there willing to take some risk and try little properties, have at it.
Except, Josh, I think I will argue, there are not people out there willing to take that risk.
I know.
The development community in general in Vermont, and maybe it's the same in New Hampshire, has really shrunk. I mean, I don't know, think 15, 20 years ago, the guys in small companies you knew that would build a few units, they're just not in business anymore. They're not there. And so that is a sort of an other sidebar problem, is the workforce development community of who's going to do that. I think, you know, the average construction worker age is 48 or something like that in Vermont, and
everyone's leaving because they can't afford to live here.
I have another question,
Sally, go ahead.
which is completely different, and nobody's even mentioned it, and maybe it's just in the sort of more tourist towns, but we're seeing a lot of our stock go to short-term rentals.
Yes.
They are completely changing the market in our community. And I don't hear about any of that at the state level, and we're getting pushback from Airbnbs because these guys are doing this, and I would just love to see some more
you know,
regulations.
that's an interesting, because I think it's already hit bigger urban areas, certainly in Woodstock. I don't know about a Stowe or a Burlington. It's actually an interesting in San Francisco, not by comparison. They're actually talking about sort of zoning out Airbnb because it's chewed up so much rental housing, and so that's an interesting.
So I don't know if you've done any studies to sort of see what impact that's having and sort of be able to.
You should.
To really understand, because I know for a fact that we have people in our community buying properties just to rent them.
It's
on short-term rentals.
very.
And that takes out those.
When you look
markets.
at that data too, and the percentage of, you know, seasonal and rental homes, that's a big number.
Dramatically in even the last 3 or 4 years. I mean, this is something that's really new.
Well, the whole, I don't know what statistic I gave you, but the larger increase of second homes in these 2 counties, and I think that's it. And, you know, so you buy it, you rent it out for, let's say, half the year, and you use it for half the year. And so that, and like I said, if you're coming from New York or Boston, paying $250 to buy a house, maybe not in Woodstock, but some, you know, is cheap.
And then you can rent it out the rest of the time and you're not there, so it removes it from the regular, you know, local real estate market. So.
Brother Flip?
Yeah, so just, and I know we're running late, but, so I've got in front of me every home sale price by town, by year for the past 11 years in this district region. So, and I'm from Springfield. So the average sale price in the Green Mountain Two Rivers region last year was $252,000. In Springfield, Vermont, the average sale price last year was $129,000. As I sit here tonight and I just checked, there's 115 homes for sale in Springfield. Tough to give one away. So you would think, well, geez, there's all this, no one can find a home up here, you gotta build all this stuff. You think they'd come down our way, and that started to happen. But now you start to get into the other complexities that we could stay here all night talking about, such as socioeconomics, such as education quality, such as 29.5% of households in Springfield are on reach upper 3 squares. What does that mean? How does that help or hurt the community be attractive to attract those upscale people to buy your homes, and also, frankly, take the jobs that the companies in our region are having a hard time attracting people to come to? It's a swamp and an intersecting circle of issues beyond which we've talked about tonight. And as well as a tired housing stock, and how do you provide the incentive to freshen that up and make it more marketable?
But I think that is somewhat of a resource issue. Even at 129,000, my gut would be they may not be in fabulous shape. You don't want to put a low moderate income family in a house that's not.
But I'm not talking about low moderate income families. I'm talking about attracting working class professional families. You can't do that because they don't want to come to the community because of this. And so the housing issue and the housing model sort of touches on this. Is absolutely, you got to provide resources for low and moderate income people. You've got to look at the housing issues for everyone.
Well, and I think to your point, it gets to the economic side of it, which is we have to raise up, the economics throughout the state, because every community has its town where there's a 0 vacancy, and then there's, you can't give them away. I mean, we have that in Central Vermont, and so I think that's a statewide problem, and the solution to that, and it's a lot of what the governor speaks to, is just raising everybody up, and so then you're not trying to pull from here or pull from there. It's attractive in its own right. So.
There's a subset of persons who believe, now that you've touched on economy, that we make a mistake spending our grant funds or funding at all on affordable housing when we should be spending that money on developing the economy. Now, they don't know what developing the economy means. You have vacant storefronts and they focus on that. You have an industry that like Ethan Allen that closes, and that's their focus. But they firmly believe that it's a mistake that our federal money is spent almost totally in one direction and from their perspective, not in the other, and they become very aggressive about that, and then you end up with head banging and the community gets nowhere.
Well, you gotta look at, first of all, federal money comes in buckets. I think the housing money predominantly is housing money. It can't be used for economic development. Josh's money is in fact used for it. And you gotta figure out, well, what's, it gets back to that anchor tenant, what's gonna sustain the building, what can you put in it?
Well, it's their perspective,
Yes.
That's the problem. Some of them grew up in the revenue sharing days when you could use money whenever you wanted. And from the 60s and 70s till now, the way that federal money has changed is significant. They still have this perspective that it could be used differently and better, and it gnaws on them so much that they can't see their way clear to agree that housing is a fruitful effort.
And Bob's point, I mean, sometimes you talk to people in Chittenden County that, $300,000 is a cheap house, and they need more of them every day. They'll be sold like that. And you say, go to Springfield, go to Windsor, go to Rockingham, go to, I can name town after town after town where you've got all kinds of housing stock to look at. You can buy 2 or 3 of them for that price. And we need to find ways to fix those up, bring them back into productive use. I mean, after all, these are the historic neighborhoods that we say we want Vermont to have, right? Around our village, around, and like that very resource is just in shambles in some of our communities. And I think things like, the governor talked about, I hate the word, but the flipper credit, or these other things where people can invest their private capital into fixing these up, making a small profit and putting them back online in an improved place and making that an attractive neighborhood once again has to be part of the solution. Because we have housing stock in some parts of the state that is sitting vacant and doing, and serving no one any good, and it's declining the town's, grand list and everything. And so it's very different from region to region, what needs to happen and what type of investments.
And I'll just play a little devil's advocate. I don't disagree, but there's always the public good. And, the HARP program, which was a wad of federal money we got after the recession to buy foreclosed and blighted homes and repair them. We did 75 of them around the state, and they're fabulous homes. But once you start touching them, you up the ante. They needed total new energy, retrofits, the code stuff, and it's all good stuff. I don't want to say it's not good stuff, but it isn't, doing moderate income is not cheap.
Right.
And so it's just sort of thinking about, and I think kind of tossing it back, what can you all do on a community level? If you have a revolving loan fund, can you really incent one of those private developers to do 2 or 3 units? I don't know. I don't see them flying out of the woodwork, but
In the private funds, they wouldn't have to meet all those same standards in theory, but we've got a lot of this. We've put so much good policy into what we want to see done that it has affected the costs of what you need to do to your home. To make it meet all these codes and these new standards. When our wages hasn't, those same policies haven't brought up our wages.
Anyway, I think we're running out of time. Thank you very much for a very stimulating conversation. We expected it, and you delivered. So.